Now, good morning again. This is your moderator, Philippe van den Daal. I work as a chemicals policy advisor with Healthcare Without Harm Europe. And today, we will be discussing the soon-to-be formally adopted medical devices regulation. Before getting to the heart of the matter, I will say a few words on who we are. But first, I want to introduce our speakers. So, moving on to the next slide. I would like to introduce Rico Buitink, who is the attaché and at the permanent representation of the Netherlands to the EU. And he is the former chair of the Working Party on Pharmaceuticals and Medical Devices. He started his career at the Ministry of Health in the Netherlands as a staff advisor, first for the relations with the Parliament, and then as an advisor to the State Secretary, later to the Minister of Health. Having a master's degree in international relations, he continued his career in Brussels as health attaché, and he chaired, as I said, it is important, the Working Party on Pharmaceuticals and Medical Devices. Our next presenter will be Jesper Loorsen, Business Director and co-owner of Militech. Militech represents the first step in the supply chain and has more than 25 years' experience developing and supplying polymer solutions for PVC replacement in healthcare applications. We will conclude with Hannah Johnson. She is a project manager and chemical expert with the Stockholm County Council. She is a chemist with a doctoral degree dedicated to the environmental and health perspectives of chemicals. She has a background in organic chemistry and small pharma companies. Her main responsibilities with the Stockholm County Council are strategic processes regarding substitution of hazardous chemical substances and the education of co-workers within the field of environmental issues. Now, looking at who we are, Healthcare Without Harm is a non-profit European coalition of hospitals, healthcare systems, healthcare professionals, local authorities, research and academic institutions, and environmental and health organizations. We currently have 76 members in 26 countries, 17 of which are EU member states. We have 4 regional offices in the United States, in Europe, Brussels, Latin America, and Asia. A few words on our vision and mission. Our vision: we help the healthcare sector mobilize its ethical, economic, and political influence to create an ecologically sustainable, equitable, and healthy world. In our mission, we seek to transform healthcare worldwide so that it reduces its environmental footprint and becomes a community anchor for sustainability and a leader in the global movement for environmental health and justice. No doubt that this is a tall order, but that is the challenge we feel that we all have to take up. As part of this broad mission, we have been active in tackling the issues raised by endocrine disrupting chemicals in medical devices. EDCs, endocrine disrupting chemicals, are a group of chemicals that interfere with hormones and the endocrine system. Bisphenol A and phthalates are known EDCs commonly found in medical devices. There have been documented cases of EDCs leaching from PVC devices like blood bags, medical gloves, and intravenous tubing. We know that exposure to EDCs has been associated with an increase in the incidence of hormone-related diseases and illnesses. So we continue, Healthcare Without Harm Europe, to support a clear phase-out of these substances contained in medical devices when safer alternatives are available, technically feasible, and do not compromise the safety of patients and healthcare professionals. Annex 1 Point 7.4.1 of the new medical devices regulation offers the possibility of replacing harmful chemicals such as EDCs with safer alternatives. But it is early days. The medical devices regulation will only be applicable 3 years after its entry into force. So it's hard to predict how the medical devices regulation will actually be implemented and how it will work in practice. But the medical devices regulation is more than that. It's an ambitious piece of legislation that will have a major impact on the way medical devices and their accessories are manufactured and put onto the market. And to tell us more about the medical devices regulation, we have invited Mr. Buiting. And during the Dutch presidency of the Council of the EU in the first half of 2016, Mr. Buiting chaired the Working Party on Pharmaceuticals and Medical Devices. In this capacity, he led and successfully concluded the negotiations with the European Parliament on the medical devices regulation. Mr. Buiting, the floor is yours.
Yes, good morning, everybody, and thank you very much, Philip, for that good introduction. Indeed, my name is Rico Buiting, and as Philip already said in his introduction, I work as a health attaché in Brussels at the permanent representation of the Netherlands to the EU. And during the Dutch presidency, the first half of 2016, I was indeed involved in the negotiations with the Parliament on the regulations, medical devices, and in vitro diagnostics. So today I will present you the end result of these negotiations. And since it would go too far, I think, to present you all the details of these big pieces of legislation, I will only highlight the main changes and issues that got most political attention during the negotiations. Next slide, please. So this is what we are going to do during the next 15 minutes. I will briefly tell something about the background of both regulations and the legislative process. After that, I will focus on the main changes in both regulations and the so-called Big Five of political issues. Next slide, please. So this is where it all started, and I think for most of you, this picture tells enough. It's the PIP scandal, of course, in which a manufacturer illegally manufactured breast implants made from cheaper industrial-grade silicone, which resulted in leaking implants in women's bodies, causing serious health threats, serious health problems, I have to say. Next slide, please. So this PIP scandal in 2011 was actually the trigger for action at European level. First of all, with the adoption of the so-called Dalli Action Plan in 2012, named after the former Commissioner for Health, John Dalli. The action plan included measures to reinforce the oversight of notified bodies and market surveillance. And these would later actually be the two very important pillars of the two regulations. The shocking news of the PIP scandal also triggered, of course, action in the European Parliament, which adopted a resolution asking the Commission to investigate more stricter rules in the pre-market phase of the market authorization of devices. And also this would be a very important element in the proposal of the Commission that was adopted in 2012, July. Next slide, please. So very briefly, this is how the legislative process looks like. And indeed, it has been a very exceptional, intensive and long process. It took almost 4 years and 8 EU presidencies to get where we are now. And that's also in terms of Brussels quite exceptional. Currently, both texts, and I'm talking about almost 350 pages each, are being translated and checked by legal linguistic experts before they can be formally adopted by the Council and Parliament in early 2017 is the expectation. And as Philip indeed said, the date of application for the medical devices regulation will be 3 years after the date of publication. For IVD, this will be a bit later, namely 5 years. Next slide, please. This is a picture of 3 very happy gentlemen. That is Timmermans, Juncker, and Prime Minister Mark Rutte, who are celebrating the deal reached in June this year. Next slide, please. So what are the main changes in the new regulations? Basically, and to simplify things, one could speak of three main changes. So first of all, the system as a whole will be strengthened. So that is both the pre- and post-market phase of authorizations. Secondly, there will be stricter rules in place for high-risk devices like implants. And thirdly, the system will be much more transparent and devices will be better traceable. Next slide, please. So to start with the first part of the supply chain of devices, manufacturers, importers, and distributors will have to comply with much stricter rules. And what's new is that manufacturers from third countries are also obliged to have an authorized representative in place in the EU, which is responsible for instance, the technical documentation of devices, but even more importantly, they can also be held accountable for any damage that is caused by a defective device. So to this and their own ends, manufacturers should have liability coverage measures in place. And we will come back to that later. Economic operators should also have detailed risk and quality management systems in place to mitigate risks and malfunctioning of devices as much as possible, and report serious incidents and field safety corrective actions. Next slide, please. And then the notified bodies. And this may well be the most far-reaching changes in the whole system. First of all, there will be reinforced designation procedures for notified bodies and better oversight by competent authorities. There will also be stricter requirements for personnel and expertise of notified bodies. Furthermore, joint assessment teams consisting of several experts from the competent authorities of several different member states will jointly reassess whether the notified body still complies with the requirements laid down in the new regulations. That's every 3 to 4 years for more detailed reassessment, and every year a less detailed reassessment. And last but not least, the work of the notified bodies itself, so that's the assessment of the technical documentation and clinical evaluation, will also be reviewed by competent authorities now and then, both off and on site. Next slide, please. Then we reach the post-market phase of the supply chain, and here the co-legislators wanted to emphasize the importance of a strong post-market surveillance system with a clearly defined responsibility for all actors involved. So manufacturers have to produce several reports to this end. The periodic safety update report concerns the post-market surveillance measures with regard to high-risk devices. For the lower-risk devices, manufacturers have to provide a lighter version, namely the post-market surveillance annual report. Manufacturers also have to report on serious incidents and produce trend reports on issues that are more related to the performance of the device. In all these cases, competent authorities have to safeguard that this system of surveillance and vigilance will actually work. Then a medical devices coordination group, the MDCG, will be established to exchange expertise between the member states, support the Commission in its work, and contribute to the development of standards and common specifications. On a case-by-case basis, representatives from industry or other stakeholders can also be invited. And finally, EU expert panels and reference laboratories will be established to provide scientific, technical, and clinical expertise. For example, when a new device will have to be assessed. Next slide, please. Another very important change in the medical devices regulation is the introduction of stricter rules for high-risk devices, like implants. In this regard, there will be much more detailed and stricter rules on clinical investigations and clinical evaluations. We already spoke about the stricter post-market surveillance measures and the review of the work of the notified bodies. And it's needless to say, I think, that these provisions particularly have effect on high-risk devices. The scrutiny mechanism is something special for high-risk devices, and I will come back to that later. Next slide, please. There was also a clear need for more transparency and traceability in the system. Therefore, the unique device identification was introduced. With this so-called UDI, all devices will be registered in an electronic system, which makes them easier to identify and traceable. The UDI will be linked to the so-called EUDAMED, that's the European Data Bank on Medical Devices. And this data bank informs the public and competent authorities about devices that are put on the market, including all kinds of relevant information like data on the safety and performance of high-risk devices. Next slide, please. So having gone, I think, in rocket speed through all these main changes in the new regulations, I will now pick 5 issues that got the most political attention during negotiations, as we called them at a certain stage, the big 5. So that's the genetic counseling issue, reprocessing, liability, scrutiny, and CMR substances and endocrine disruptors. And that will, of course, be the most important issue today. Next slide, please. So the first big issue was genetic counseling. This is dealt with in the IVD regulation. The Parliament amendments asked for rules on counseling by medical practitioners in cases of genetic tests, for example, prenatal screening. The Council, however, felt that this was clearly a matter of national competence. But of course, we had to find a compromise, and therefore we agreed that Member States shall ensure information to patients on genetic testing, however, as appropriate. And this is, of course, a very important element for Member States to have the necessary freedom to decide in which circumstances this should apply. In any way, the scope is limited to diseases that cannot be cured, for example, Huntington disease. And if Member States want to go further than the regulation says, then that's possible. Next slide, please. Then reprocessing, and that's the process, so the disinfection or the sterilization to reuse, for instance, surgical instruments. This was a very controversial issue in the Council. There were many divergent positions. In one Member State, it was forbidden to have reprocessing. In others, there is reprocessing, but we have own rules. So also here we have to find a compromise, and the deal was that reprocessing is allowed unless forbidden by national law, with some exemptions for hospitals, and we deleted a list that was formerly in the Council text, a list that said that certain devices could not or could be reprocessed. That was a big concern for the Commission, so that's why we deleted the list. Next slide, please. The third big issue was the wish of the Parliament to have a mandatory liability insurance for manufacturers, in case a manufacturer is accountable for damage caused by a defective device. The Council, however, proposed to help the patient in a different way, namely by providing the patient with information what to do in case of damage, and in accordance with the already existing liability directive, oblige manufacturers to have measures in place to provide for sufficient financial coverage in respect of potential liability of damage. Next slide, please. The scrutiny mechanism. That was from the start one of the most political issues in all 3 institutions. Although the Council recognized the need for a better system for high-risk devices, the Council wished for a more balanced approach than the scrutiny mechanism that was initially proposed by the Commission. The end result in the negotiations was that the scope is limited only to Class 3 implantable devices, and Class 2B active devices that administer or remove medicinal products, for instance, insulin pumps. We will also use expert panels who can provide expertise in the clinical assessments when these kind of devices have to be assessed. And this new procedure is also shown in the next slide. which you can read another time, I think, at your convenience, because maybe it's too complicated and too much to go into detail right now. Next slide, please. So this will be my final slide. And that's, of course, the core issue that we will talk about today, CMRs and endocrine disruptors. So this is the final big issue in the discussions between the Parliament and the Council. Very briefly from my side, the Parliament initially wished for a ban of dangerous substances in medical devices and suggested to use alternatives. The Council was of the opinion that this is disproportionate and also not good for patient safety, since alternatives are not always available, nor is the risk-benefit ratio always that clear. Therefore, it was decided to not have a ban, but instead introduce a strict justification procedure for the use of these substances in invasive devices. To help manufacturers notify bodies and competent authorities, SCEAR, that's a scientific committee, will provide scientific guidelines starting with phthalates and then other CMRs and endocrine disruptors. And I guess the other presenters today will tell you a bit more about these issues in a few minutes. So this will end my presentation. I want to thank you very much for your attention. And should you have any further questions, you can of course raise them during the webinar itself. But on the next slide, my email address is also being shown, so you can send it also by email. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Buiting, for a condensed yet panoramic overview of the medical devices regulation. Now we will hear from Mr. Lawson, and he is the business director and co-owner of Meditech. As I indicated earlier on, Meditech has a long history in providing PVC-free solutions for flexible films for primary packaging and tubing applications. So Meditech did not wait for the medical devices regulation. They have already supplied commercial solutions to the healthcare market for about 20 years. They are probably the suppliers with the longest commercial history in the market for PVC substitution. The medical devices regulation could help more companies pursue a similar approach that is in line with the 7th Environmental Action Programme, which seeks, amongst other things, to reduce exposure to EDCs. Now, if you go back to the medical devices regulation, looking at Article 26.1 C and D, manufacturers of medical devices will be asked to draw up a summary of safety and clinical performance of their device. And in so doing, they will have to give a description of the device or variants, if such exist, and the description of the differences. They will also have to provide possible diagnostic or therapeutic alternatives. In another article, Article 49, that discusses the clinical evaluation of medical devices, the manufacturers will have to consider currently available alternative treatment. So if properly implemented, the medical devices regulation should ensure that the solutions provided by companies such as Meditech become more widespread among manufacturers. Mr. Lawson, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Philip, and thank you very much also for the good introduction. Obviously, as we hear that regulations are tightening, and therefore I think our long history in this market is relevant to share to the forum. As Rico pointed out, that the industry sometimes explains that there is not many alternatives available. I'm here to say that there are alternatives available as a raw material side, and with some developments, alternatives can fairly easily be brought to market because there's a lot of applications already served. Still, these are to be looked at as niche applications so far, because of course there's always a switching cost in regard to technology change and regulatory matters, etc., to bring a new polymer or new device generation to market. I will give, during my presentation, a very brief, just one slide about our company, and then share some of the experience and how we approached developing materials to replace flexible PVC. And then lastly, I will also share, we have participated in a very interesting development program sponsored under the EU's LIFE program in regard to developing a PVC-free blood bag. Next slide. There we go. And that was my... So quickly about Militech, we have was founded back in Denmark in '79, and we have been producing the materials here since the late '80s. We offer materials from elastomers and polymer compounds, which means that we can tailor a plastic material, making it suitable for the intended application. We have devoted our company to only work towards the healthcare market segment. For us, that means that more than 95% of our business is in healthcare. We have to remember that most companies doing what we do, making polymers, etc., less than 2% or even less are of their business is into healthcare. So that means, of course, there's also limited resources and focus for most polymer companies to serve this market. We have gone, of course, against the stream on this, but that was, of course, also to justify our existence. We are today producing at a high-efficiency plant in Denmark, as mentioned, where we're located and which have been expanded several times. So we have had a healthy growth because of these products actually starting to come in use in the market. Today, we produce about 25,000 tons, which is quite substantial seen into this market. And we do supply globally. It's not only a drive from Scandinavia, where it initially started, but it's also today a drive from different areas in Europe, but also overseas, such as in China, and also in some specific markets in America. We have 3 product offerings. Those are polyolefinic-based compounds. We have also customized polymer compounds. And then lastly, we have elastomer compounds, which in combination of using these different material technologies, we can very often serve a total application from a 360 perspective and be a total scope supplier. This picture just shows a few of those products that we have serving and delivering to for many years. That can be everything from IV bags, dialysis bags, nutrition bags, and drug delivery systems or drug packaging systems. So obviously some of this is from the pharma segment, and that's where our business started. Over the most recent years, we have also developed more and more business into the medical devices, and that can be into infusion sets, catheters, or even some drainage applications. The product line that we obviously mainly use for our PVC substitute products are within our XP range, and in this coming slides, I will a little bit highlight what kind of material this is and how we approach the development of these materials. Obviously, bringing a new polymer to the market or new product to an application or a medical device producer, it obviously needs to consider the future regulations and requirements. So I would have to say that some of the medical device companies are already in discussions with us to develop products and to evaluate if the products are suitable for their applications. And obviously there is a focus that these should have improved properties, they should add value, they should not just be a replacement, but very often they also like to see improvements in their products. That could be on the environmental aspect, or that can be in regard to physical properties or design features and manufacturing processes. Obviously, the products today that you are bringing something forward to replace something that's very cheap and very easy to process, there is a challenge for these materials to have easy processing. It should be, of course, recyclable. No doubt has to be in regard to regulatory compliances. As a footnote, I can say that most of our materials are scrutinized much tougher than some of the regulations that are being designed especially to allow PVC in use. Of course, one of the topics today is also making sure that these materials are then built up safely. We are very often talking about non-PVC materials, but obviously we need to make sure that this material is sustainable for the future, making sure that it's also safe in use from a chemical perspective. And then, of course, we want to have something that's also affordable for the market, both by the producers, but also into the hospital sector. So all these things are put into our design criteria when we're designing a polymer. And it's not just that we take an existing system and try to push it out, but we actually develop these products for the application together with our customers. The base polymer chemistry behind these materials are polyethylene, polypropylene, and synthetic rubbers. Very often people are saying that these new materials replacing PVC are new chemistry, but I want to defend that, and I would like to highlight that polyethylene and polypropylene are materials with many, many years of track record, developed in the 30s, 50s, and some of the synthetic rubbers were even also developed in the 50s and got much better over the years. If you look into the market of polymers in use already in this industry, in the healthcare segment, we find that roughly about 50%, nearly 50% of this is polyolefin-based already. So again, I just want to take out the mystery. It is already used, these new products. The new thing is that we can modify them, making them suitable for instance, PVC replacement, but they can also be oper replacement for instance, other rigid materials like polycarbonate containing BPA. So the chemistry have of course, some attributes by nature that we are basing our materials on. And that is, for instance, that has good chemical resistance. They're making them very ideal for pharmaceutical packaging. They have by nature no need of using plasticizers. They are carbon-based, so on incineration, you will have carbon dioxide and water. They have low density. This is why these materials have been embraced very much in automotive industry and in packaging industry. And of course, these products are also high volume manufactured materials produced by many operators or producers globally. They are still in good growth, and there are still coming new developments and tweaks to these material technologies. So these materials, seen from a mega trend, is materials of the future, and they're continuously being developed and getting better to reach out to more and more applications. And because they are big commodity polymers, they also come with a fairly low price. Seen from an environmental perspective, these materials will be in full compliance to REACH, and of course does not contain any of the substances of very high concern. As mentioned, they are PVC-free, so there is no chlorine in these materials. And secondly, I want to feature the density on this product, which is about 25 to 30% lower than a soft PVC grade. This will give you a lower material consumption, which will of course reduce the cost of the medical device. These are the direct savings, but you also have indirect savings in reduced waste in the hospitals, and of course also reduced waste handling in incineration. So this is something across the supply chain that there will be savings and is important. Again, this is one of the drivers for other industries to use these type of polymers. The other thing making these building stones for us ideal is that they of course have a very good environmental profile. And we have had some customers making some specific life cycle analysis on the full supply manufacturing of these products, and these have been published and compared to, for instance, soft PVC or other soft polymers like polyurethane. Another reference point seen from an environmental perspective is that some years back, Nordic Eco-labeling or made a SWAN labeling system for some specific product categories like dialysis bags or infusion sets. And there they identified that polyolefins were some of the most environmental sustainable materials, and followed by the synthetic rubbers and other, and then later came PVC. Lastly, I do like to highlight though that sometimes replacing PVC with, for instance, a polyurethane that's actually, from an environmental perspective, a step backwards. So when our materials are designed from the purpose, we have the ideal building blocks, and then we can combine the recipes, just like PVC is a recipe between PVC, plasticizers, and various additives. We can blend different types of polyethylenes, polypropylene, and synthetic rubbers to make them suitable for the intended use. And as by default, they will be latex-free, BPA-free, phthalate-free, obviously. They will also be animal-based free. That has been the concern also from the industry and also in other industries. They are in compliance with the substance of very high concern, where we find the phthalates and several other plasticizers. And then, of course, on top of these have low chemical migration because there are no phthalates or other plasticizers that can easily migrate from the material. Also, because of the better chemical resistance, they will also be adhering better and work better in the application of use because, for instance, the drug absorption is much lower in a packaging application. And then lastly, of course, these materials are then designed, tested, evaluated, and approved according to current ISO standards on medical devices, USP Pharmacopoeia, European Pharmacopoeia, and so forth. So they are tested, and very often test monographs for polyolefin-based materials are much more stringent than they are for instance, PVC. So with these building blocks and with that experience that we have had over the years in some of these applications that are already highlighted, we were back in 2011 invited to actually work with one of the last few medical device applications that we have been in touch with, still using PVC with phthalates. Obviously, it's a high-risk device, being a blood bag, which is in use. We were invited by the Karolinska Hospital in Jekelius in Sweden that saw a demand for these applications, but that did not see and find solutions from the industry or offerings from the industry in this regard. So therefore, we were approached, and together with an existing supply chain or our existing customers supplying, for instance, for IV bags and dialysis bags and nutrition bags, we put together an independent, experienced supply chain that are used to work with our type of materials, the polyolefin-based materials. So that was, besides Militech, that was VPAC in Finland, Primo in Poland, a sweet Danish company with operations in Poland, and lastly, also Hematronic from Italy, which actually can fabricate the bags and have a long history making and pioneer in making bags in non-PVC for medical applications. So now I would just show a couple of things that we've been doing and how in the status of what we have reached so far in regard to this project. Obviously, blood bag system is a quite complex system that everybody knows that is working with it. It's a multi-bag system, many tubes, many connections, lots of fabrication, handling, and so forth. But secondly, it's also used in a quite shrewd way in a hospital. It's very manually operated and handled. So therefore, it also has to have a very strong and wide use friendliness to be able to meet those requirements. Of course, in regard to sterilization, should not be blocking, sticking to each other inside or bag to bag, should be very soft. At the same time, also very tough, not to break. You have to have very strong sealing capability of the material. You have to resist very high G forces that you will see in the centrifuge. The drop resistance, obviously, these bags are frozen. But they also have to have good resistance at about 37 degrees of the temperature of the blood. And of course, it has to have the clarity and comply to regulatory compliances. So what we did in the LIFE program, which is a program not really to develop materials, but to demonstrate existing technology suitability, we actually applied existing materials that have been used for dialysis bags and IV bags for many years. And we have actually managed to produce a bag that has actually been put to test. And we actually see some of the bags that has actually been used filled with blood. It's actually one of our team members in the development partnership donating her blood for this testing, and then there's testing have been done on the actual blood. Conclusions were actually presented a couple of conferences, both in Sweden, Denmark, and most recently here in the US as well, and within the blood therapy segment. And we can conclude we are very, very promising results. We're not 100% quite there. The combination of the material offerings and properties of the material together with new developments of storage solutions will enhance the shelf life of the blood bags that we have developed. Currently, a blood bag made from PVC have a shelf life of, or required to have a shelf life for the blood for 42 days. And we know that, as most people perhaps know already, that the phthalates that are migrating and contaminating the blood have the positive effect of protecting the blood. With this study, we have managed to have a shelf life up to 28 days so far. That is not in compliance to the ISO. However, when you look at a hospital, usually blood bags are used within 7 to 20 days, depending on blood type. So one could actually argue maybe it is sustainable to have this product. Further improvements can still be done with the materials with some development are applied, or together with also the storage solutions. So we are confident that we can even extend the shelf life besides 28 days. But so far we have reached 28 days in regard to the hemolysis tests, which is one of the critical aspects. Last phase and this is my last slide, is just to update what's going on to do. Currently, there are developments to make user tests in 4 other hospitals in Sweden to get more feedback on the bag design, softness, handling, etc., etc. Then there has to be some CE marking, sterilization validations, slightly softer tubes, as some of the feedback we are already starting to get. So we are working to hopefully to bring it even forward so we can come even closer to the current requirements of PVC. So please stay in tune for that. You can see more on this website. We are bringing this technology forward. We are committed in this team to bring the technology forward and make it applicable for these applications and markets. More specific questions can be taken later online or end of the session. Thank you for your attention, and I hope this gives some benefit and value to you.
Thank you, Mr. Lawson. I just wanted to mention that in 2013 you won the Owner and Leader of the Year award, and that's an award that recognizes and rewards owners who have the courage to believe in their own talent and whose company focuses on innovation, change, and entrepreneurship. Now, do not be mistaken, I am not saying this to flatter or promote you, but to make the point that the way in which the medical devices regulation will be implemented will also be crucial for our European companies. If the mandated consideration of safer alternatives is not taken seriously, this will hamper innovation, and it will deprive companies designing or manufacturing medical devices of scientifically reliable information on which to base a decision to use or replace a substance. So in the long run, it will erode any chance of building a competitive advantage for these companies, and it will affect their reputation and brand. This being said, I want now to move to our last speaker. That's Hannah Johnson. Ms. Johnson, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Philip. Thank you for the kind introduction, and it has been really interesting to hear what Rico and Jesper has to say about this as well. My name is Hannah Johnson, and I work at the Stockholm County Council in the capital of Sweden. And as you can see on the slide that I'm presenting, that we are responsible for the healthcare, publicly financed healthcare and public transport in the Stockholm region. The County Council has more than 40,000 employees and a yearly budget of around 9 billion euro. And to minimize the impact that we have on the environment, we have an environmental program determined by our politicians. And one of the subjects that we are addressing are, of course, hazardous chemicals. Our goal is to decrease our environmental impact caused by hazardous chemicals. And this means that we should buy nice chemical products. They should not, for example, cause allergy or be hazardous to aquatic life. It also states that we should buy nice articles and consumables, and this, of course, includes the medical devices. We wish to expose neither patients nor employees to foreign substances, and also to contribute to a toxic-free circular economy. This is our mission, and the question is then, how do we make it happen? Well, one of our missions is to phase out PVC from all of our functions, really. A formal decision was made by the County Council Board in 1997, so around 20 years ago. The focus then was on flooring and office equipment, tubing, and also information boards used in public transport areas, which then contained PVC. And the main reasons in 1997 was a high release of mercury and other heavy metals during production phase, high content of endocrine disrupting phthalates, and at the end, the release of dioxins when incinerated. And in 2016, we are still continuing to phase out, and the reasons are not the same, but almost. We still see a release of problematic substances during production. We believe that there is still an uncertainty around the alternative plasticizers. And we use the precautionary principle to be careful. PVC is recyclable, but with the plasticizers in the material, the recycling procedure is much more complicated. And of course, for a lot of the medical devices, we don't recycle because they are contaminated with body fluids, so we still incinerate them. From the beginning, the attitude was very, very positive, and it was actually estimated that the PVC will be phased out after a year after the decision. And since you all know, this was a little bit optimistic, a little bit too optimistic, and 20 years later we are still facing and using PVC. It was a very high impact factor, though, that the politicians made the decision, and it has affected the attitude at retailers and manufacturers to our favor. It has also made it easier for us to use the requirement of PVC-free products when we procure. And I usually say, and I say very often, that procurement is our most valuable tool to phase out hazardous substances. Of course, there are a lot of other things you can achieve with procurement, and there are other tools as well to phase out. But procurement as a public institution, this is a very good tool. We make requirements on chemical content in almost all our procurements, both regarding chemical products and articles and all types of medical devices. And through the process of procurement, we have reduced the amount of PVC-containing articles as well as phthalates and heavy metals. A very good example of substitution of endocrine disrupting chemicals are the examination gloves. I think in 1997, 100% of the examination gloves used within the County Council, which are about 100 million gloves every year, were made of PVC and vinyl. And now it's only about 5% that are still in PVC. And this is due to the fact that the nitrile gloves contain other chemicals that are problematic, mostly due to allergenic, being allergenic. So we still use PVC, but the phthalates are replaced by alternatives. And this is the same for flooring. There are almost no floors in PVC that we now install in our hospitals and facilities. But for some areas, PVC is the only option, and then at least the phthalates are gone. And the New Karolinska Hospital is one of these examples where we have almost no vinyl floors at all. They're replaced by wooden and other flooring, and the vinyl floors that remain there are phthalate-free. I issued earlier that we feel that the alternative plasticizers, we're not sure about how safe they really are. The most common alternatives that we use are the ones that you can see in the green box. Last year, we asked if the Swedish Institute for Toxicology Studies could try to gather information about these plasticizers to evaluate the data that is available within the European Union to see if they are safe or not. And what we found and what they found when reading a lot of papers and research about these alternative compounds is that the green ones, the ones in the green box, the top 3 ones, are also the safest, most safest ones. And compared to DHP, the research is, I mean, there are not so much information available, but good enough, we say. So we feel that we are quite safe with these alternative compounds. Another question to address is, of course, are the alternative devices more expensive? And this is also a very interesting question, actually, because when we first procured the examination gloves, and when we first asked for them in nitrile, this was in 2003, we had to pay around 4 times the price compared to vinyl gloves. And 8 years later, that's 2 more rounds of procurement, the price is the same. So we managed to change the market demand and thereby lowering the price. And this has been the same for some catheters, and for some catheters it has not been the same. So we still feel that this is changing the market can make the price go low. And as Jesper also said, that if we were to use a plastic like polyethylene and polypropylene, where there's a big market demand for other reasons, the plastic is cheaper. So the success factors, well, large volumes, that is one of the most important factors. In Sweden, we are a very big county council, and we are a big purchaser of articles and consumables. Internationally, we're not as big, but together with other public operators that make the same demands, it's possible for us to largen up the volumes and thereby lowering the price. We make a regular evaluation of function of alternative products. That is, that we evaluate them, how good they work, how comfortable they are to use, how flexible are the tubing, etc., etc. And by this, we can also make a continuous, have a continuous dialogue with suppliers and manufacturers to make the products better if they are not good enough. And this dialogue is both as a part of the procurement process. Sometimes we have it before procurement starts to inform the market on what we want. We also think that a transparent procedure is very important for this, to have discussion with companies, with researchers, with product developers, because bringing out a new product to the market takes a few years, so you can't just do it when you start a procurement. Also, one of the success factors is that we have a very concrete phase-out list. We have listed the unwanted chemicals that we feel are unwanted. The properties that we seek to avoid are stated in the listed criterions for everybody to read. They are, for example, allergenic, cancerogenic, endocrine disrupting, and environmental hazards. And the Stockholm County Council phase-out list is based on substances found in our different operations, ranging from healthcare to real estate maintenance. The phase-out list is a usable tool for putting up demands in procurement, as it sends both manufacturers and retailers a clear message. These are the non-wanted substances. And this also makes the retailers and manufacturers be able to plan to develop new products. The requirements in the phase-out list are tougher than legislation, and that is the point. And the advantage with having such a specific list that we have is that it is customized for our needs, and it also sends a very clear message to manufacturers. And this was actually my last slide, so thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. That was very informative. It's almost 12 o'clock. I think we can afford a few questions, and we had a couple of questions sent to us. I will formulate the question, and I would like to address this question, the first question, first to Rico, and then perhaps if there are some thoughts from the other two speakers, feel free. The question relates to the database that the European Commission has, EU DAMET, I can't pronounce it, but that EU database on medical devices will be adapted, tweaked following the adoption of this regulation. And the obvious question is, it will list medical devices, but will it also mention when a medical device does not contain these chemicals that we wish to phase out? Will it be clear, and what will the access be for the average user or the average citizen? So will it specifically mention that the medical device does not contain specific harmful chemicals, and will all of that information be accessible? I think, Mr. Buitink, what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, Philip, thank you for that question. I don't think so that will be in the data bank, the UDAMET. However, if there would be a serious risk with the device containing such substances, then indeed there will be a kind of alarm in the database. So then it will be clear for the public and also for competent authorities, for hospitals, etc., that there is a certain device on the market that contains CMRs or endocrine disruptors that do pose a risk for the patient. But I don't think so. So sorry, I cannot be certain about that. That in the data bank itself, it will be published what kind of substances are in the medical device itself. That should be actually on the label. We have, of course, also in the annex of the regulation provisions for what will be on the label itself, and that also concerns CMRs and endocrine disruptors. So it will be more in the labeling measures. So hopefully that provides a little bit of an answer to you.
Yes, thank you for that. Would there be any comments from either Anna or Jesper on that point?
Well, see, from my perspective, not as a potential supplier indirectly to the industry, but more as a private citizen of Europe, I think when EU creates such a wonderful tool for the future, it would be wise to include these indications, because it is hard to evaluate the product without the insight in these matters. And most people that are consumers, either professional consumers like in hospitals or in private citizens, because we have to remember a lot of devices are going more and more for home care, then I think such a tool will be helpful to guide in regard to these substances. Also, the substances there's always new debates about new chemicals. Like we know the substance of very high concern list is updated every 6 months. So I think it's also hard to stay in tune. So as a citizen of Europe, I think that would be a nice added feature to such a database.
Thank you for that. Well, it doesn't feature yet, as Rico says. It is, however, something we feel might be interesting, and I think we have 3 years before the regulation is actually implemented. So it might be interesting for some of us to take a closer interest at how the database will finally look like. Moving on to another question that we received. Let me read this. It was sent to us by one of our attendees. The person's saying that the Danish EPA and the Medicine Authority has recently assessed 10 alternatives to classified phthalates and found them safe. So that's a link that we will be circulating later. It's more a comment, I guess.
Yes. There are as many opinions as there are scientists on this matter. I think, in some approaches you are applying risk assessments, and if there is a risk or potential concern, and we know that some of these substances, they are forbidden to be used in, for instance, toy applications, etc., etc. So obviously there are different opinions on these. We believe that one should have a safety opinion, meaning that always better be safe than sorry.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. If I may ask another question for Rico this time, I think something you said during your presentation on the opinion of the scientific committee. You mentioned that SHARE was going to provide guidance on EDCs. Do you have any idea of the timeline? When do you think we can expect the guidance from the scientific committee of the Commission?
Yes, that will be somewhere before the date of application. So the Commission still has some time together with SCEAR to work out these guidelines, but it will not be later than 2020. The Commission is now, together with the Scientific Committee, also working on delegated acts, also this delegated act to work out these kind of details. But I guess it will take some time, but not later than 2020.
Thank you for that. And perhaps now a very last question for Anna. Your presentation was very informative, and still today, what do you think are the biggest challenges that remain in terms of phasing out EDCs? Can we have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that that's one of the biggest challenges, at least for us as a procurement office, or how to present us. Information of ingredients is one of the most challenging issues. For chemical products, we have a legislation that says that the ingredients have to be listed, at least the hazardous substances, and this is an issue. And today we are facing the issue that a lot of the dental medical devices, for example, are reclassified from a chemical product with an attached ingredient list to a medical device, and they don't need a list of ingredients according to legislation. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges, actually.
Thank you. If there are any more thoughts on that or any final words from any of the speakers, speak now. Well, thank you very much for participating. We are a bit over time, but I think we had a very stimulating discussion, 3 very interesting presentations. So I would like, again, to thank the speakers, but also my team back here in Brussels who organized all the sort of logistics for this to be possible. So thank you very much. You can see the email addresses of our speakers. I guess that they would be happy to continue this further. So please do not hesitate to send them an email. Thank you again. Goodbye.